I'm Tiffany and I will explain for introductions for my group work, which is overview situations of Malaysia at global relations and country level. So before I start, as we know that all over the world and also our country was affected with COVID-19 are really worse right now. So I really hope that people and also my lecturer for this course, economic theory, Dr. D, please be safe and please stay home. I will start with this overview Malaysia at global level. As we know that Malaysia is the one's most economy in the world with a threat to GDP ratio since 2010. This is because openness to trade and investment has been instrumental in employment creation and income growth of the job in Malaysia linked to export activity after Asian crisis at the year 1997 to 1998. Next, region level, Malaysia government was planning to transform the country capital, which is Kuala Lumpur, into a major finance center. This is because Malaysia wants to rise a profile and spark greater international trade and investment through the constructions of the Tun Razak Exchange. But not least, at country level, Malaysia is the sixth largest South Asia according to International Monetary Fund's 2020 and also 39th largest economy in the world.
Now, the analysis on the impact of COVID 19. According to Cheng 2020, it is now clear that this pandemic will have hugely damaging effects on both the Malaysian macroeconomic and the economic well-being of the people. The main source of economic damage in Malaysia are two. The first is the knock-on effects of coronavirus impact abroad, and the second is generated domestically by the newly imposed movement control measures. Besides that, Cheng stated at the macro stage, the closing of companies and services, along with travel and movement restrictions, will have far-reaching impact on private consumption and business investment. Its negative consequences on individual livelihood and enterprise would be all the more harmful. Individuals and companies impacted by temporary closures would be at the higher risk of expressing acute cash flow constraints as their earnings decrease. In the graph, we can see that the initial aggregate demand is decreasing as a result of the pandemic, and the price of goods and services is also falling. The initial balance moved to the left to a reduced balance, and both the gross domestic product and the amount required and supply fall sharply. Economic growth is negative. There is deflation in the economy, and the projected inflation rate for 2020, which is 0.11%, is very poor and unsatisfactory. The employment rate is higher than it was before. Consumption and private investment have decreased rapidly. We all know that a sharp decrease in aggregate demand is the key of the causes for economic restrictions. Aggregate demand is directly influenced by the following factors, which is consumption, investment, government expenditure, and next export. Decreasing consumption, expenditure, and next export therefore have an effect on aggregate demand, and aggregate demand has declined rapidly, and due to a sharp decline in aggregate demand, economic growth has reached the worst and inflation has dropped sharply. Because of the sharp decline in inflation and growth rate, the level of output also declined rapidly, rising the level of unemployment. The most important is tourism-related sectors are expected to be influenced by widespread travel bans and aversions to travel risk, while production interruptions in the global supply chains will have an impact on the manufacturing and export sectors. The implementations and subsequent extensions of the Movement Control Order (MCO) would, while crucial, reduce economic activity. In the MCO era, decreased social and leisure activity will simply reduce consumption and investment activity until the pandemic is completely regulated internationally and domestically. In addition to the pandemic, the domestic economy will also be affected by steep falls and unpredictable changes in crude oil price and ongoing supply instability in the commodity sector. From development official statistics, the unemployment rate increased from 0.1 percentage point to 4.7% in September 2020, after the 4-month period of decline since June 2020. The rate of unemployment rose by 1.5% to 748.2 million. The employment to population ratio rose by 0.1 percentage points to 65.3% in October 2020. Many of the B40s are casual and low-skilled employees who are more likely to be unemployed, lead to the financial difficulty. Low health, illiteracy, malnutrition, and chronic disease, most of which occur in B40 households and live in high-density housing, which is put them at the higher risk.
Okay, before I start, let me introduce myself, which is I Nurul Aisyah. Myself will present for the part of recommendation. Okay, for the recommendation of the governments on the strategies to minimize the impact of COVID-19 on economic growth of Malaysia, which it is related to the macroeconomics concept. We can see that the economy is going through a deep recession in structural nature. So it is important that the government increase the spending towards infrastructure development and other relevant projects. So it will help the country to generate the employment and provide money to people. First and foremost, the strategies taken by the government to minimize the economic growth in Malaysia in terms of the impact of COVID-19 is mitigating the immediate impact of COVID-19. For example, The government has taken the initiative to restructure and reschedule loans which complement the funding scheme provided by the government and financial institution, such as small and medium size businesses obtain implement under SRF. It has established more than 450,000 SME jobs throughout communities and industry sectors. Okay, small and medium-sized businesses will also likely to gain from other support facilities under the fund. Those provisions further contribute as moderate the indicator of any increasing in lending or funding of banks to SME. The second point of recommendation of the strategies to minimize the impact of COVID-19 is by boosting the economic growth itself, which it will process the limit effect of COVID-19 on Malaysia economic growth. Okay, for example, the government may apply the policies of growing household income and introducing people-centric program. However, okay, for the infrastructure, the government has taken action by allocated 2 billion ringgit through the introduction of small-scale infrastructure project at central, state, and local government level. There's 200 million ringgit will be allocated from this allocation for the rehabilitation and renovation of housing and public services, while 150 ringgit will be allocated for the upgrading of alternative water and electricity resource in small towns. Last but not least, one of the approach is to encourage investment growth as well. Okay, this is to make sure that global development and government expenditure will be maintained. This will offer incentive of the government to develop more private spending, while it can accelerate the economic activity. However, it will require expending 3 billion ringgit anticipated for the National Fiberation and Connective Program, or known as NCP. This program enhance the productivity and efficiency of telecommunication and enable network connectivity to all perspective of communities throughout the nation. Further allocation of 13 billion ringgit is scheduled for the development of LED street lights, solar panels on the roof, and transmission line. Okay, in the conclusion, it is vital to recognize that the risk to stimulative methods as defined seems to be that the money in circulation is rises. There could be a case of inflation in the economy. Okay, it is crucial that they take further steps such as restructuring interest rate and evaluate the strategies adopted during the pandemic once the economy revives to retain inflation low and stable. As the situation of COVID-19 facilities having to cut in the region. As a sequence of increased demand, inflation is the rising in the price of goods and services. Okay, that's all for the parts of recommendation from me. Thank you.
Can conclude that to the governments to move forward in these situations is Malaysia will continue to build a positive and share every agenda and play a balanced and organized role in international relations to ensure the steady post-crisis recovery. Thank you.